She was down to her last dollar when she heard the music. The violin's melody cut through the subway station's chaos like a knife through silence. Something about it made her stop, made her forget the eviction notice in her pocket, made her forget she hadn't eaten in 2 days. You know that feeling when music touches something deep inside you? When it speaks to a part of your soul you forgot existed? That's what happened to Sarah that cold December morning. She stood there transfixed, watching the street musician pour his heart into every note. His clothes were worn. His violin case lay open on the ground with just a few coins inside. But the music was worth millions. The subway station was a river of humanity, thousands of souls flowing past in their morning rush. Business suits mixed with construction uniforms. Students with heavy backpacks dodged around elderly women with shopping bags. Everyone had somewhere to be, something important to do. But Sarah had nowhere left to go. The eviction notice had been final. 3 days to vacate, 3 days that had already passed. She was officially homeless now, carrying her life in a backpack that felt heavier with each step. The shelter had been full last night, the night before that too. She'd spent both nights riding the subway, pretending to sleep, trying to stay warm. She reached into her pocket and felt that last crumpled dollar bill, the one that was supposed to buy her a cheap meal, the one that represented her last bit of hope in a world that had taken everything from her. Her fingers traced its worn edges. George Washington's face stared back at her, indifferent to her plight. This dollar could buy her a candy bar, could get her halfway to a cup of coffee, could be the difference between eating today or not. But the music wrapped around her like a warm embrace. It spoke of loss and redemption, of pain transformed into beauty. The violinist's eyes were closed, his body swaying with each phrase. He wasn't performing for the crowd. He was communing with something greater. Without thinking, she dropped it into his case. Their eyes met for just a moment. He nodded, a small smile crossing his weathered face. She turned to leave, not knowing she had just given her last dollar to Joshua Bell, one of the world's most celebrated violinists, not knowing that this single act of generosity would change both their lives forever. What makes someone give when they have nothing left to give? What drives a human heart to choose kindness over survival? Is it madness or the highest form of sanity? As she walked away, the music followed her, not just in her ears but in her chest, where her heart remembered how to beat with purpose again. Joshua Bell had played for presidents and royalty. His Stradivarius violin was worth $4 million. Concert halls around the world sold out within minutes when his name appeared on the marquee. Last week, he had performed at Carnegie Hall to a standing ovation that lasted 12 minutes. Tickets had cost $300 each. The irony wasn't lost on him as he stood in the L'Enfant Plaza subway station, playing for free to an audience that mostly didn't know he existed. But that morning, he was just another street musician in a Washington, D.C. subway station. This wasn't about money. It was an experiment in human perception, in how we recognize beauty when it appears in unexpected places. He had already been playing for 45 minutes. Bach's Chaconne, one of the most intricate pieces ever written for violin. Then Schubert's Ave Maria, pieces that regularly moved audiences to tears in concert halls. Here they were background noise to the morning commute. Hundreds of people had rushed past, too busy to notice that one of the greatest musicians alive was giving a free concert, too focused on their destinations to hear the masterpieces floating through the air. A few children tried to stop, drawn by instinct to the beauty, but their parents pulled them along. "We don't have time," one mother said. "We'll be late." Only 7 people had stopped. Only 27 had given money. The total in his case, $32.17. One woman had recognized him, did a double take, but said nothing. She threw in $5 and hurried away, probably wondering if she was losing her mind. A middle-aged man stood against a wall for 3 minutes, listening intently, then left without contributing. Each person who passed was a story, a life too full or too empty to pause for beauty. Then Sarah appeared. He noticed her immediately, not because she stopped, but because of how she stopped. like someone who had been walking through a desert and suddenly found water. Her face transformed as the music reached her. The tension in her shoulders released. The tight line of her mouth softened. For a moment, she looked years younger, as if the music had reminded her of who she used to be before life wore her down. He watched her reach into her pocket, saw the hesitation, the internal struggle. The way she looked at that dollar bill told him everything. This wasn't spare change to her. This was survival. When she dropped that dollar bill, he saw something else in her eyes. Desperation, hunger, the kind of pain that comes from losing everything. But also something else. Defiance, a refusal to let circumstances strip her of her humanity. She gave not because she could afford to, but because she couldn't afford not to. Because in that moment, beauty mattered more than bread. Why do we miss the extraordinary when it's right in front of us? How many miracles do we walk past every day because they don't come in the packages we expect? And what does it say about us when we're too busy to notice that heaven is playing a concert in hell? Sarah didn't go home that night. How could she? Home was a small apartment she'd already lost. The eviction was final. Her belongings would be on the street by morning. She wandered the city instead, the violin's melody still echoing in her mind. Every street corner reminded her of what she'd lost. The playground where Emma used to swing. The coffee shop where she and Mark had their first date. The hospital where she'd worked for 10 years, saving children's lives, until grief made her hands shake too much to insert an IV. It had been 3 years since the accident. 3 years since a drunk driver took her husband and daughter in an instant. 3 years of medical bills, funeral costs, and a grief so heavy it crushed her ability to work, to function, to live. The drunk driver had walked away without a scratch. His lawyer got him community service, said it was his first offense, said he was a good man who made one mistake, as if one mistake couldn't destroy entire worlds, as if Sarah's world hadn't ended at 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday when a police officer knocked on her door. The dollar she gave away could have bought her a coffee to stay warm, could have gotten her a bus ticket to a shelter. But something about that, music made material things seem insignificant. It reminded her of her daughter's laughter, of her husband's whispered, "I love you," every morning, of a time when life held meaning beyond mere survival. Emma had wanted to play violin. She was only 7, but she'd drag Sarah to the music store every week to look at the instruments. "When I grow up," she'd say, "I'm going to play so beautifully that angels will cry." Mark would laugh and say she already made angels cry with her singing in the shower. She found herself sitting in a 24-hour diner, using their free Wi-Fi on her dying phone. Maybe she could find a shelter with space. Maybe someone would respond to her job applications. Maybe tomorrow would be different. But she'd been saying that for months now, and tomorrow always looked exactly like today. Empty. Cold. Impossible. Her phone had 12% battery left. She scrolled through job listings. Pediatric nurse wanted. Experience required. Background check required. Stable work history required. Everything required what she no longer had. The owner, an elderly man named Frank, noticed her sitting there with no order. He'd seen that look before. The hollow eyes, the weight of the world on slumped shoulders. He'd been there himself once, 40 years ago, when he came to this country with nothing but hope. Without a word, he brought her a cup of coffee and a sandwich. "On the house," he said. When she tried to protest, he waved her off. "Music brought you here," he said, nodding toward the window where the subway entrance was visible. "I heard you gave your last dollar to that violinist. Anyone who gives their last dollar to beauty deserves at least a sandwich. Sometimes angels don't have wings. Sometimes they wear aprons and carry coffee pots. Sometimes they play violins in subway stations. And sometimes they recognize grace in others because they've been touched by it themselves." Joshua couldn't get her out of his mind. He had seen thousands of faces in his audiences over the years. Wealthy patrons in designer gowns, music students hanging on every note, critics waiting to find fault. But something about that woman in the subway haunted him. The way she gave when she clearly had nothing. The recognition in her eyes, not of him, but of something deeper in the music. He'd performed for audiences who paid thousands of dollars for their seats and looked bored, yet this woman, who gave her last dollar, had truly hurt him. He had participated in this experiment to prove a point about art and society, about how we're too busy to notice beauty. The Washington Post had arranged it all: hidden cameras, documentation of every person who passed. It would make a great story about how modern life has deafened us to beauty. But she had noticed. More than that, she had sacrificed for it. In all his years of performing, he'd never seen such pure response to music. No pretense, no social obligation. Just a soul recognizing another soul through sound. That night, he couldn't sleep. His Georgetown apartment felt too large, too quiet. The silence mocked him. He who could create such beautiful noise couldn't find peace in the absence of it. He kept thinking about the dollar bill, wrinkled and worn, probably passed through countless hands before reaching hers, and then given to him, a man who could buy 1,000 dinners with what he earned in a single performance. The Stradivarius sat in its climate-controlled case, worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. But what was its worth compared to that single dollar given in pure recognition of beauty? The experiment was supposed to last an hour. He had collected data, proven his hypothesis. People don't stop for beauty when it's free and unexpected. But she had stopped, and now he couldn't stop thinking about why. What drove someone with nothing to give everything? What kind of life had shaped her into someone who valued beauty over survival? His manager would call him crazy. The experiment was over. The data collected, the story would run in the Sunday paper, and people would shake their heads about the sorry state of cultural appreciation. But data couldn't capture what he'd seen in her eyes. He made a decision. He would find her. In a city of millions, it seemed impossible, but something told him this wasn't over, that their brief encounter meant something more. He'd played for thousands, but he'd never felt so truly heard as in that moment, when a desperate woman gave him her last dollar. The universe didn't arrange such meetings without purpose. Have you ever met someone for just a moment and known your life would never be the same? What if every person we pass has a story that could change us if we only stop to listen? Finding one person in Washington, D.C. is like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. But Joshua had resources, and more importantly, he had determination. He started with the subway security footage. Hours of reviewing tape until he saw her again. Followed her path as far as the cameras could track. She had walked slowly, like someone with nowhere urgent to be. Like someone who had already missed every important appointment life had to offer. The security guard thought he was crazy. You want to find someone who gave you $1? But Joshua couldn't explain the compulsion. How do you tell someone that a single dollar had weighed more than any standing ovation? Then he hired a private investigator. Not something he'd ever imagined doing, but this felt important, necessary, like the universe was pushing him towards something he didn't yet understand. The investigator, a former cop named Martinez, took the case with professional skepticism, rich people and their whims. But even he had to admit there was something compelling about the story. A woman giving away her last dollar. It spoke to something deep in the human experience. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of Joshua playing concerts, signing autographs, living his normal life that suddenly felt anything but normal. Every performance felt hollow. He found himself scanning audiences looking for her face, wondering if she ever knew who he was, wondering if it would matter. The Washington Post story had run, thousands of comments online about how sad it was that people didn't recognize beauty, but they'd missed the real story. The story of one woman who did recognize it and gave everything she had. The investigator found her. Sarah Chen, age 34, former pediatric nurse, recent widow, currently homeless. The details broke his heart. Here was a woman who had dedicated her life to healing children, now unable to heal herself. A woman who had given everything and lost even more. The investigators' report was thorough. The accident, the drunk driver, the spiral that followed. How she'd tried to return to work but couldn't stop her hands from shaking. how she'd sold everything, piece by piece, trying to stay afloat. How the system had failed her at every turn. Joshua sat in his Manhattan apartment surrounded by luxury, holding her information in his hands. What right did he have to insert himself into her life? What could he possibly offer that wouldn't seem like charity or pity? He who had never known real loss, real hunger, real desperation. But then he remembered the dollar. She hadn't given out of pity. She had given out of recognition. Soul to soul. Music had connected them in that moment, and maybe, just maybe, it could connect them again. How many times do we let fear stop us from reaching out? What connections do we miss because we're afraid of looking foolish or crossing boundaries? He picked up his phone and called Martinez. "I need an address." Sarah was washing dishes in the diner when he walked in. Frank had hired her the week before, paying her under the table, letting her sleep in the storage room until she could save enough for a deposit somewhere. It wasn't legal, but Frank had his own relationship with rules. Rules are for people who haven't learned when to break them, he'd said. The storage room was warm and dry. The work was hard, but honest. For the first time in months, she felt like a person instead of a statistic. She didn't recognize him at first. He looked different without his violin, dressed in jeans and a simple jacket, instead of the worn clothes from the subway. But when their eyes met, she knew. The same eyes that had closed in ecstasy as he played. The same hands that had made the violin sing. What was he doing here? How had he found her? For a moment, she considered running. She couldn't handle pity from a stranger, especially not him. The morning rush had ended. The diner was nearly empty. Just two truckers in the corner booth and an elderly woman reading a romance novel over tea. He approached slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for the dollar." The words hung in the air between them. She nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "How did you—" But the question died on her lips. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that he was here. They sat in a corner booth, two strangers connected by a moment of music and generosity. The vinyl seats creaked. The fluorescent lights hummed. Frank pretended to be busy behind the counter but kept glancing over. He told her about the experiment, about who he really was, the Washington Post article, the hidden cameras, the point they were trying to prove about society and art. She listened in growing amazement and embarrassment. Joshua Bell. She'd heard the name, of course. Who hadn't? One of the greatest violinists alive. And she'd given him $1 like he was just another street musician. She laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. "I gave my last dollar to a millionaire," she said. "That's about right for my luck." The laugh transformed her face, and he saw who she must have been before life broke her. But he shook his head. "You gave your last dollar to music, to beauty, to something that moved you. That's not about luck. That's about who you are." She looked at him then, really looked at him. Not the famous violinist, not the millionaire, just a man who understood something about her that she'd forgotten about herself. Why do we so often see our greatest strengths as weaknesses? What if the things that make us vulnerable are actually what make us powerful? Joshua learned her story over coffee that stretched into lunch, then dinner. The accident, the loss, the spiral that follows when grief meets financial catastrophe in America. He learned about her daughter Emma, who wanted to play violin, about her husband Mark, who sang in the shower every morning, about a life that had been full of music until silence swallowed it whole. She talked like someone who hadn't been heard in years. The words poured out, sometimes tears with them. Frank kept refilling their coffee cups, shooing away other customers to give them space. "I used to play piano," she told him. "Nothing special, just enough to accompany Emma when she practiced." Her hands moved unconsciously, playing invisible keys on the table. "We had this old upright, probably worth nothing, but it was Mark's grandmother's. Emma would stand on a phone book to reach the keys. She could only play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but she played it like it was Beethoven's Ninth. So serious, so determined. The memory lit her face, then dimmed it. I sold it last year, the piano, I mean, to pay for the funeral. He watched. Those hands, strong despite everything, graceful despite the calluses from washing dishes. Hands that had comforted sick children, held her dying husband, given away her last dollar. Hands that remembered music even when the instrument was gone. Emma never got her violin, Sarah continued. We were saving up. Mark worked overtime. I took extra shifts. We had this ceramic pig where we put all the spare change. Emma named it Melody. She'd feed it coins and say, "Grow fat, Melody, so I can make music." The pig survived the accident. Nothing else did. I smashed it open at the funeral home. $63.42. Not enough for a violin. Barely enough for flowers. Play for me, he said suddenly. There's an old upright in the back. Frank mentioned it. She shook her head, but he persisted. Music doesn't live in the instrument, he said. It lives in the player. Emma knew that. That's why she could make Twinkle, Twinkle sound like symphony. Finally, she stood. Led him to the back room where an ancient piano sat under a dust cover. The keys were yellowed, some stuck. But it was there, waiting. She sat at the dusty piano. Her fingers trembled on the keys. The first notes were hesitant, uncertain. E flat instead of E. But then muscle memory took over. She played a simple melody, a children's song she used to play for Emma. And in that run-down diner, with its cracked vinyl seats and flickering neon sign, magic happened again. Music filled the space between them. Not perfect, not polished, but real, raw, honest. Frank appeared in the doorway, dish towel in hand, tears on his weathered face. When was the last time you let someone see you unpolished and imperfect? What? Beauty might emerge if we stopped hiding our broken parts? Word travels fast in the classical music world. The story of Joshua Bell's subway experiment had made headlines before, but when he posted a video of Sarah playing that old piano, with a caption telling her story, the internet exploded. Not with the usual viral sensation of manufactured emotion, but with something genuine. People connected with her loss, her strength, her choice to give when she had nothing. Within hours, it had 1 million views. Within days, 10 million. The comment section became a testament to human connection. People sharing their own stories of loss, of finding beauty in darkness, of the power of a single act of kindness. Donations started pouring in. A GoFundMe page appeared, then another. People wanted to help, to be part of the story. But Sarah wanted none of it. I didn't give that dollar to become a charity case, she told Joshua. I gave it because your music made me remember who I used to be. Before the world broke me. When I believed in beautiful things. She was sitting in Frank's storage room, surrounded by boxes of napkins and coffee filters, looking at her phone in disbelief. Strangers wanted to give her money. Thousands of dollars. It felt wrong, like selling her grief. But Joshua had a different idea. Not charity. Opportunity. He'd been thinking about it for days. His foundation had good people, but they all came from the world of professional music. They understood instruments and theory and performance. But did they understand loss? Did they understand what music meant to someone who had nothing else? Come work with my foundation, he said. We bring music education to underprivileged kids. You're a nurse, you understand children. You understand loss. And now you understand what music can do in the darkest moments. She stared at him. A job. A real job. Using her skills. Helping children. It seemed too good to be true. Like the universe was finally offering her a hand up instead of another blow. I haven't worked in 2 years, she said. My references are gone. I have no address. No appropriate clothes, no. He held up his hand. You have everything we need. You have a heart that gives when it has nothing left. You have hands that remember how to heal. You have a story that proves music matters. Everything else is just details. Why? She asked. Why do you care what happens to me? He thought for a moment, how to explain that her dollar had been worth more than any payment he'd ever received, that in giving him that worn bill, she'd given him back his purpose. Because you reminded me why I play music, not for the fame or the money or the recognition, but for that moment when it touches someone's soul. You gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as chance encounters. What if every person we meet has something to teach us about ourselves? 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of a classroom full of children. The Joshua Bell Foundation had hired her to coordinate their outreach program, but she did so much more. She taught kids who couldn't afford lessons. She held the hands of those who were grieving. She showed them that music could be a ladder out of darkness. The classroom was in a community center in Southeast DC, a neighborhood where beauty had to fight for survival. But here, in this room with its donated instruments and patched walls, beauty was winning. One little girl, Maria, reminded her so much of Emma. Same age, same bright eyes, same determination to make beautiful sounds despite having an instrument held together with duct tape. Maria's violin was a donation from someone who'd seen the video. It wasn't much, but in Maria's hands it was everything. She practiced with the dedication of someone who understood that opportunities like this didn't come often in her neighborhood. "Miss Sarah," Maria asked one day, "why do you sometimes cry when we play?" Sarah knelt down to Maria's level. The question deserved truth, not comfortable lies. Because music helps us feel everything we're afraid to feel. Happy tears, sad tears, grateful tears. They're all part of the song. Maria nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "My mama cries when she hears me practice. She says it's because I sound like hope." Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought, to sound like hope. Wasn't that what they were all trying to do? Joshua visited the program regularly. He played for the kids, taught master classes, but mostly he watched Sarah work. Watched her transform pain into purpose. Watched her teach children that their circumstances didn't define their worth. She had a gift he'd seen in few teachers, the ability to see not who these children were, but who they could become. One day, he brought his Stradivarius. $4 million of wood and history. The insurance company had nearly had a heart attack when he told them where he was taking it. He let each child hold it, play a note. Their eyes went wide with the weight of it. Not just physical, but the weight of holding something precious. "This violin is precious," he told them, "but not as precious as the music inside each of you. This violin is just wood and strings, without someone to play it. You are the magic, you are what makes it sing." Little Marcus, who usually couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes, held the violin like it was made of butterflies. He drew the bow across the strings and produced a sound that was part screech, part music, all wonder. Do we recognize the million-dollar potential in everyone we meet? What masterpieces are waiting to be discovered in unexpected places? The anniversary was always hard. 3 years became 4. But this year was different. This year, Sarah wasn't alone. She woke in her small apartment, nothing fancy but hers, to the sound of her phone buzzing. Messages from the children, from other teachers, from parents whose lives had been touched by the program. "Thinking of you today, Miss Sarah. You are loved. Thank you for showing us that broken can still be beautiful." She sat on her bed, reading each message through tears. The children from the program had prepared something, though she didn't know what. They'd been whispering for weeks, stopping conversations when she entered the room. Even Frank was in on it, grinning mysteriously when she asked what was going on. All she knew was that she needed to be at the community center at 2 p.m. "Dress nice," Maria had said, then giggled and run away. These kids, who had so little, wanted to give her something. The thought alone was gift enough. The auditorium was packed. Parents, teachers, even some professional musicians Joshua had invited. Local news crews were there, following up on the viral story. Sarah sat in the front row, confused and overwhelmed. She recognized faces from the neighborhood, People who usually looked at each other with suspicion now united in some secret purpose. Then Maria walked on stage wearing her best dress, the one she saved for church and special occasions. "Miss Sarah taught us that music can heal," the little girl announced, her voice strong despite the size of the crowd. "So today we want to give her some healing." What followed was imperfect and beautiful. Children playing instruments they'd only been learning for months, missing notes, rushing tempos, but playing with their whole hearts, playing for her. They played songs she'd taught them, songs from different cultures representing the beautiful diversity of their neighborhood. Each child had a moment to shine, to show what they'd learned. Some played solo, others in small groups, all of them pouring their hearts into their instruments. Then Joshua walked on stage. "Sarah gave me $1 in a subway station," he told the audience. "But what she really gave me was a reminder that music isn't about perfection. It's about connection. It's about giving what you have, even when it's all you have." He raised his violin. The children raised theirs. And together, they played a simple melody that Sarah had taught them, Emma's favorite song, the one she could never bring herself to play anymore. Until now. Have you ever experienced a moment when pain transforms into beauty? When loss becomes the foundation for something greater? Life doesn't tie up neatly like a movie. Sarah still grieved, still had days when getting out of bed felt impossible. The pain of losing Mark and Emma would never fully disappear. Some mornings she woke expecting to hear Emma's feet pattering to her room. Some evenings she caught herself setting 3 plates instead of 1. Grief, she learned, wasn't something you got over. It was something you learned to carry. But it had transformed. What had once been a weight that crushed her had become a depth that connected her to others who were suffering. She could look at a child struggling with loss and truly understand. Could hold space for their pain because she knew its shape intimately. Like Thomas, whose father had been killed in a drive-by shooting. He came to class angry, fists clenched, refusing to touch the instruments. "Music is stupid," he said. But Sarah recognized the anger as grief's bodyguard. She didn't push, just sat with him letting him be angry. Week after week until one day he picked up a drum and hit it with all his rage. The sound that came out was raw, honest, real. "That's music too," she told him. "Sometimes music sounds like pain. And that's okay." The foundation grew. More children, more programs, more lives touched by music and compassion. They started a grief support group that met before lessons. Children who had lost parents, siblings, friends. They would sit in a circle and share, or not share, just be together in their loss. Then they would play. Sometimes the music was sad, sometimes angry, sometimes miraculously joyful. All of it was valid. All of it was healing. The program caught the attention of child psychologists who wanted to study the intersection of music therapy and grief counseling. Sarah worked with them, sharing what she'd learned not from textbooks but from living. Sarah moved into a small apartment near the school. Nothing fancy, but it was hers. A piano sat in the corner, a gift from the other teachers. It was another old upright, nothing special, but when she played it, she heard Emma's laughter. Every morning she played, not for an audience, not for perfection, but to remember, to honor, to heal. The neighbors never complained. Mrs. Rodriguez from downstairs said it helped her arthritis. Mr. Kim from next door said it reminded him of his childhood in Seoul. Music, spreading healing like ripples in a pond. Joshua became a regular part of her life. Not as a savior or a celebrity, but as a friend. Someone who understood that beauty could emerge from the most unexpected places. That sometimes the greatest performances happen not in concert halls, but in subway stations and community centers in the hearts of those who choose to keep going. They would have coffee at Frank's Diner, planning new programs, dreaming bigger dreams. "We should take the kids to perform at the subway station," Joshua said one day. "Show them where it all started." Sarah smiled. "Full circle," she said, like a song that ends where it began. One day, Maria asked her, "Miss Sarah, do you think your daughter is proud of you?" Sarah's breath caught. She looked at this little girl who had lost her own father, who understood too much about loss for her age. "I hope so, sweetheart. I hope so." Maria took her hand. "I think she is. I think she sent Mr. Joshua to find you. I think she makes sure you hear her when you play. What would those we've lost want us to do with our pain? How can we honor their memory by helping others heal?" The subway station looked the same. Commuters still rushed past, focused on their destinations. But Sarah stood where she had stood 2 years ago, this time with her own violin. Not a Stradivarius, just a simple student instrument. But in her hands it was enough. The circle was complete, but this time she wasn't alone. 20 children from the program stood with her, instruments at the ready. They had gotten permission from the transit authority. This was official. But it felt like something more, like a prayer, like a promise. She opened the case on the ground and began to play. The same melody Joshua had played that day. The one that had reached through her despair and reminded her that beauty still existed. Bach's Chaconne, simplified for her skill level, but played with all the complexity of a life that had known both devastating loss and unexpected grace. The children joined in, each adding their voice to the symphony. Violins, cellos, flutes, drums. A beautiful chaos of young musicians, playing not for perfection but for the pure joy of making music together. A few people stopped, a mother with 2 children, an elderly man with kind eyes, a teenager who looked lost and alone. Then more, and more. Soon a crowd had gathered, drawn by the unusual sight of children making music in a place designed for hurrying. Some recognized Sarah from the viral video. Others just recognized beauty when they heard it. A businessman in an expensive suit stood transfixed, missing his train. A homeless woman danced at the edge of the crowd. A group of tourists took pictures, but then put their phones away and just listened. She played for them. For everyone who needed to remember that they weren't alone in their pain. That sometimes a stranger's kindness can change everything. That music, real music, isn't about the price of the instrument or the fame of the player. It's about the connection between souls, between the broken and the healing, between the lost and the found, between a grieving woman with $1 and a famous violinist pretending to be nobody, between children who had nothing and adults who had forgotten everything. Someone dropped $1 in her case, then another, then handfuls of change and bills. She would donate it all to the foundation, of course, but that wasn't why she was here. She was here because someone had to be. Someone had to stand in the chaos and create beauty. Someone had to remind busy people that miracles walk among us every day, that every person rushing past might be carrying unbearable pain or unexpected grace, that we are all just one act of kindness away from a completely different life. As she played, she thought about that morning 2 years ago, when she had nothing left to give but gave anyway, when a world-famous violinist was just a street musician who touched her heart, when $1 became a bridge between 2 lives that needed each other. She thought about Frank and his sandwich, about Maria and her hope, about all the children who had learned that music could carry them through the darkness, about Joshua, who had reminded her that she still had something to give. You never know who needs your kindness today. You never know when your small act might change someone's world. You never know when the music will find you. So stop. Listen. Give what you can, even if it's all you have, because somewhere, someone is playing just for you, and somewhere, someone needs what only you can give. The music doesn't end. It just waits for the next person brave enough to hear it, to share it, to pass it on. In a subway station, in a diner, in the heart of a child, in the last dollar of someone who refuses to let the world steal their humanity. Listen. Can you hear it? It's playing for you right now. Like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. This channel is for those who believe in the power of small acts to change lives.